I'm going to show you how to make this newborn baby cocoon, and this is going to be for a beginner. You can see this is the bottom of the cocoon, and then it opens up a little bit wider towards the top. And I found that these type of cocoons work best for newborns because they like to feel swaddled, which is why I made this one for my granddaughter. But I made it in a different color, and I decided to use these colors for this cocoon. And you can see that when you're making your cross stitches, they should line up in a row as you make them. This is the baby doll that I'm going to show you that's going to have the cocoon on, but first I just want to show you the beautiful bonnet that she has on and the beautiful little dress. I have tutorials for these as well as her adorable little booties. She is a 3 to 6 month size, so she still fits into my cocoon that I made, but the cocoon is more for a 0 to 3 month size baby, but I'm going to show you that she can actually fit into it as well. And here she is, all snug in her little cocoon. And again, she is more of a 3 to 6 month size, and this cocoon I made the size 0 to 3 month, but you can make the bottom portion larger. I show how to do that in the video. You would have to do that during your increase rounds, and I show you at that point if you want yours a little larger for the bottom portion. But I made this more for newborns because they like to feel swaddled, and this is what it looks like. The materials you're going to need for this project are your J or 6mm crochet hook and a tapestry needle as well as a pair of scissors. For the main color, I used Lion Brand Yarn's Pound of Love. The color is Antique White. You get plenty of yarn. This is how much I still have left over after making one cocoon. The other yarn that I used is by Yarn Bee Tender Touch, and is called Orchid Haze, which is where I got the name for this cocoon. My little orchid. This is the color, and this is how much I have left over after making one cocoon. And I just want to show you how much yarn I have left over. You can see I barely put a dent into my Lion Brand Pound of Love. And here I still have plenty left over of the purple yarn, which was the Yarn Bee, to make a matching hat. You have to use it for decoration, but there's plenty here to use in your matching hat along with your other yarn, and even a headband if you want it. You can use whatever ribbon that you want for your project. I use this really pretty glittery purple ribbon by Ofre, and the size is 1/8 inch by 5 yards. We're going to start with a magic circle, and you're going to use whatever color that you want for the main color of your cocoon. You're going to take the yarn and just drape it across your 4 fingers. Use your thumb to stabilize, and then wrap the yarn around your 2 middle fingers. And then hold it in place with your pinky and your thumb. Then you're going to take your crochet hook and you're going to go under those loops around your middle fingers. And then you're going to take and yarn over and pull the yarn under those loops. Bring up a loop. Then you're going to yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through that loop for your slip knot. Now we're going to make 6 single crochet into the magic circle. So you take your crochet hook, go under those 2 loops, bring up a loop, then you have 2 loops on the hook, yarn over, turn the hook upside down, go through both loops for a single crochet. And then you're going to make 6 single crochet into the magic circle. Then you're going to take your forefinger and your thumb, and you're going to hold it at the base of the 6 single crochet, just like this, and then you're going to have the 2 loops on the opposite side of your 6 single crochet. You're going to pull on one of them. If it doesn't close, then you're going to let go and pull on the other one, but this one is closing, so gently, just close it gently because you can close it more later. Then take your loose yarn end and pull on that. Then your work should look like this. Now we're going to make 2 single crochet into each stitch around. So right now we have 6 stitches around. So you're going to go into that first stitch, and you're going to make 2 single crochet into that first stitch. So you just yarn over, bring up a loop, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through both for a single crochet, and then you're going to go in the same stitch, bring up a loop, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through both for a single crochet. So I just made 2 single crochet into the same stitch, and you're going to make 2 single crochet into every stitch around until you have a total of 12. And this is how your work should look. You should have 12 stitches all the way around. And as a beginner, I would recommend counting. So I'm going to get my tapestry needle and show you how to count. So right here, I have my tapestry needle in one of the stitches. That one counts as 1. And then you have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that's how you count your stitches. And I know it's not fun, but I would recommend counting your stitches just for your first project or until you get good at crocheting. Now you're going to need a yarn marker. I like to use just one of my scraps of yarn for my yarn marker, but you can buy yarn markers if you want. Just place it right where you left off, and it just helps you keep track of where you are because we're going to start doing our increase rounds. So for the first increase round, what you're going to do is you're going to take your crochet hook, go into that first stitch. You can see how I went under both loops for that first stitch. You're going to bring up a loop, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through both for a single crochet. So 1 single crochet in that first stitch. Then in the second stitch, you're going to make 2 single crochet into the same stitch. And you're going to repeat that pattern all the way around back to the yarn marker. So I'm going to do one more set with you. In the next stitch, you're going to make 1 single crochet. And then in the second stitch, you're going to make 2 single crochet into the same stitch. And then you're going to repeat that pattern all the way around back to the yarn marker. This is how your work should look, and you should have completed 18 stitches for that round. Then you're going to take your yarn marker, move it up, and we're going to make our next increase round. You're going to make 1 single crochet into the first stitch, 1 single crochet into the second stitch, and then 2 single crochet into the third stitch. And then you're going to repeat that pattern all the way around back to the yarn marker. So I'm going to do one more set with you. 1 single crochet into the first stitch, 1 single crochet into the second stitch, and then 2 single crochet into the third stitch. Then repeat that pattern all the way around back to the yarn marker. You should have completed 24 stitches for that round, and you can see how it's starting to get bigger, which is what you want. That's why they call it the increase rounds, because your stitches, you're increasing each round and making your cocoon bigger or larger. Then we're going to move the yarn marker up for our next increase round, and by now you should see the pattern. We started with 1 single crochet and then 2 single crochet, then 1 single crochet and 2, and then 2 single crochet. And now for this round, you're going to make 1 single crochet into the first 3 stitches. And then in the 4th stitch, you want to make the 2 single crochet, your increase stitch, because you're increasing by 1. Now I'm going to show you one more set. 1 single crochet in the first stitch, 1 single crochet into the second stitch, 1 single crochet into the third stitch, and then 2 single crochet into the 4th stitch. Go ahead and repeat that pattern all the way around back to the yarn marker. Now you should have completed 30 stitches for that round. Go ahead and move your yarn marker up for the next increase round, and I'm only going to do 1 set this time. You're going to make 1 single crochet into the next 4 stitches, and then you're going to make 2 single crochet into the 5th stitch, and then you're going to repeat that pattern all the way around back to the yarn marker. That round had 36 stitches, and you can see how it's starting to get bigger and bigger as we work. So now we're going to make the next increase. You should have already guessed it. We're going to make 1 single crochet into the next 5 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 2 single crochet into the 6th stitch. Then repeat that pattern all the way around back to the yarn marker. You should have completed 42 stitches for that round, and your work should look like this. Now we only have 2 more increase rounds to do. For this next increase round, you're going to make 1 single crochet into the next 6 stitches, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 2 single crochet into the 7th stitch. That round should have given you 48 stitches. And now for your last increase round, if you're making the same size as me, you're going to make 1 single crochet into the next 7 stitches, and then 2 single crochet into the 8th stitch. And then you're going to repeat that pattern all the way around. So some people want to make theirs a little larger, and this is where you would do that. You would keep increasing, so then the next one would be 1 single crochet into 8 stitches, and then 2 single crochet into the 9th stitch. And you just keep increasing to the size that you want, and your cocoon, bottom of your cocoon, is going to get larger and larger. So that's how you would do the increase. And then the rest of the cocoon, you would work the same way that I'm going to show you for this size. So that was my last increase round, and you should have 54 stitches for that round. Then you're going to take, and you can leave your yarn marker because that will just help you keep track of where you are. Then you're going to take your crochet hook and you're going to go into the next stitch, and we're going to make a slip stitch. So it's important to follow along with this to make sure you know how to make a slip stitch. Just take your next stitch, Then you're going to yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and then you're going to pull the yarn through both loops on the hook for a slip stitch. And that is your slip stitch. Now we're going to start the cross stitch design around the cocoon. Now the first thing you're going to do for this round is you're going to make a chain of 2. So you're going to yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through that loop for 1. Then you're going to yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through the loop for 2. So this is your first chain 2 for the round, which is very important because this is the chain that you're going to be slip stitching into when you're finished with this round. So what I'm going to do to help you see it is I'm going to put a yarn marker into each of the stitches. So here you can see the first chain 2 that I have for the round. I have the brown yarn marker going through that first stitch, the bottom stitch, and then I have the black yarn going through the top stitch of your first chain 2. So when I refer to the top stitch of your initial chain 2, that is the stitch that the black yarn is in. So now you're going to skip the next stitch, which is the stitch that I have my tapestry needle going through, and you're going to work a half double crochet into the second stitch. So you're going to yarn over, you're going to skip a stitch, and you're going to work a half double crochet into the second stitch. So you're going to yarn over, bring up a loop, and then I have 3 loops on the hook. I'm going to yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through all 3 for a half double crochet. And you can see how I have the tapestry needle through the skipped stitch. That is the stitch where we're going to work our next half double crochet. So I'm going to take the tapestry needle out, and then I'm going to make a half double crochet into that skipped stitch. So I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to go into the skipped stitch, I'm going to bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through all 3 loops for a half double crochet. And then you completed 1 half double crochet cross stitch. Now you can see how your initial chain 2 is difficult to see. So if you want to put a yarn marker through each of the stitches like I did, that way you'll be able to see it when we do the joining at the end, because I found that is where people are having the most difficulty if you're a beginner, is the actual joining with that initial chain 2. So we're going to count our cross stitches, and I'm going to work the whole round with you around so you can see how to make the cross stitches, and then we're going to count them after we're done. Now we're going to make our next cross stitch. So you're going to skip the next stitch and work a half double crochet into the second stitch. So you're going to yarn over, skip a stitch, go into the next stitch, bring up a loop. You have 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through all 3 loops for a half double crochet. And you can see your skipped stitch, that's the one that you're going to work a half double crochet into now. So you're going to yarn over, you're going to go into the skipped stitch, you're going to bring up a loop, you have 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through all 3 for a half double crochet. So you could see how you've made 2 cross stitches so far. Then you're going to yarn over, skip a stitch, go into the next stitch, bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through all 3 for a half double crochet. Yarn over, go into the skipped stitch, bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through all 3 for a half double crochet. So now I'm not going to say every step, but just work the cross stitches with you. So far we have 1, 2, 3 cross stitches. Four cross stitches, and you can see how it's making a beautiful cross stitch design. And so far I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cross stitches. So you can either count them as you make them, or you just count them at the end. So I'm just going to count them with you at the end. So you can see how easy it is. You just have to get the initial design, and then once you are able to make it, then that's all it is. You just keep repeating the same pattern, and that's why I like this pattern, because you can just make it anywhere and you don't need to bring along a pattern in order to make it. And once you have the pattern down, then you don't need to count anymore, because as long as you line up your cross stitches, then you're okay. It's when you don't line up your cross stitches and your numbers are off that you need to count them. And usually it's just if you're new at it. Once you've been crocheting for a while, you don't need to count, because you know that if it's not lining up, then something's wrong. I won't be doing the cross stitches all the way around for the whole cocoon. Just these first rows are critical to make sure that you're joining correctly, because the rest of them are all made the same way. So the tricky part is joining at the end, but I want to make sure that you're making the cross stitches correct as well for the first round. Okay, we're getting close to the end here. So here you can see, let me just show you a close-up. This yarn marker just is from the lower round. I'm going to move it to show you the stitch that we have left. We have one stitch left. So here is your last stitch before your initial chain 2. I'm going to go ahead and pull the gray yarn marker through to mark it. So now you can see this is my last cross stitch that I just made. And let me count and show you how many cross stitches I have total. And this is what your work should be looking like. I have 26 cross stitches total for mine around. And then I have one stitch left right before my initial chain 2. And then I'm also going to put one more yarn marker because there is a stitch right here's the chain 2 stitch, and then you have this stitch right after your chain 2 stitch. So I'm going to put a yarn marker in there as well. Alright, so now I'm going to point out everything that I have my yarn markers in. So here, where the gray yarn marker is the stitch, the one stitch remaining before our chain 2, the initial chain 2. So here, in my initial chain 2, you could see where I have the brown yarn marker in the bottom stitch of that chain 2, and then I have the black yarn marker into the top stitch of that chain 2. And then the red yarn marker is in the stitch after the stitch of your original chain 2, which I have my tapestry needle in. So all of these stitches are important for our last cross stitch. Now for our last cross stitch, we're going to make a half double crochet into the stitch, the same stitch of our initial chain 2. So I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to go into the stitch of our initial chain 2. So you can see which stitch I went into, which is right between the gray yarn marker and the red yarn marker, right below your initial chain 2. You're going to bring up a loop. You have 3 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through all 3 for your half double crochet. And you can see that that half double crochet lies right over that initial chain 2. Then you're going to take your crochet hook, you're going to go into that top stitch of that initial chain 2, which is where you have the black, I have the black yarn marker. You can see how I went right through the stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and take out all the yarn markers. And then you can see how I went right through the top stitch of that first chain 2, which is right before your first cross stitch. So that stitch right before your first cross stitch, you're going to go right through it, not under it, but right through the stitch. Then you're going to take, you have 2 loops on your hook now, you're going to yarn over, you're going to turn the hook upside down, and you're going to go through both loops on the hook for a slip stitch. And that completes that round. So that is your first round. And you need to slip stitch and join every round the same way. So now I'm going to count my cross stitches, and then every row after has to have the exact same number of cross stitches. So I have a total of 27 cross stitches for that round. Now for the next round, you're going to make a chain of 2. 1, 2. Now I'm going to go ahead and put yarn markers into each stitch so you can see it, and I'm going to join with you for this round as well. So this time I have the red yarn in the top stitch, and I have the brown yarn in the bottom stitch of my initial chain 2. Then I'm going to make a cross stitch, and this is going to be, let me just show you, this is your first cross stitch. So you want to make sure that your second row's cross stitch is directly over the first row's cross stitch. So the first stitch that you're going to be skipping is this stitch, and then working a half double crochet into the second stitch. So as you can see, this first chain 2 is critical to remember that that was your initial chain 2 for joining that last cross stitch. So then you yarn over, and then you skip a stitch and go into that second stitch, and you can see how I'm directly over the previous row's cross stitch. I'm pointing at it with my thumb. Yarn over, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, turn the hook upside down and go through all 3 for a half double crochet. And then you're going to go make your next half double crochet to complete the cross stitch into the stitch that you skipped. So you just yarn over, go into the skipped stitch, bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, turn the hook upside down and go through all 3 for your cross stitch. So you can see how I have my initial chain 2. I have the brown yarn going through the bottom stitch of that initial chain 2, and then I have the red yarn going through the top stitch of that initial chain 2. Then you can see the cross stitch from the first round and the cross stitch from the second round, and they are directly over each other, and that's what you want as you work. Now I'm going to work over my next cross stitch from the previous row. So here are the 2 stitches over the previous row's cross stitch, and I'm going to work a half double crochet. I'm going to skip a stitch, work a half double crochet into the second stitch, and then I'm going to yarn over and go into the skipped stitch, bring up a loop, make my half double crochet, and you can see how my cross stitches are right above each other, which is what I want. So you can see how the cross stitches are directly over each other. So I'm going to do a few more with you, and then I'll let you finish making your cross stitches all the way around, and then we're going to count and make sure that we have the same number of cross stitches, and then I'm going to join with you. And it just makes a really beautiful pattern. So I'm just going to show you. You can see how my cross stitches, here's my initial chain 2, and then I have my cross stitches that are lining up exactly with the previous row's cross stitch. So I'm going to do one more with you, and then I'll let you finish. I'm going to skip a stitch, work my half double crochet into the second stitch, and I'm directly above the previous row's cross stitch. So go ahead, finish making your cross stitches all the way around, and then come back and we'll make our last one together. All right, so now I have one cross stitch left before I make my joining cross stitch. So here I'm just going to count with you to show you how many I have so far. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. So now I'm going to make the 26th cross stitch and then the last one to join. And let me just show you again these yarn markers so that you can see. And I'm going to point with my tapestry needle so you can see what I have. See if I can get the view better. Okay, so here is my last cross stitch. So I'm going to skip this stitch. Just go right through. I'm going to skip this stitch. And then I'm going to work a half double crochet into the second stitch and then form my cross stitch right above the previous row's cross stitch. And then here, this stitch is the base of the initial chain 2. So I have the red yarn going through the top stitch. I have the brown yarn going through the bottom stitch of that initial chain 2. And here again is the base of that initial chain 2. And then the black yarn is in the stitch right after the stitch of the base of the first chain 2. And then here, after the black stitch, is your first cross stitch. So I'm going to work my next to my last cross stitch. I'm going to yarn over, skip a stitch, work a half double crochet into the stitch right before the base of my first chain 2 stitch. So I'm going to yarn over, go into the skipped stitch, and this will be my next to the last cross stitch because the very last cross stitch is the joining cross stitch. So there is my cross stitch. Now I'm going to make my last cross stitch. So I'm going to yarn over. I'm going to go into the stitch where I have the black yarn, bring up a loop, make my half double crochet, and that is how my work looks so far. You can see where I did the half double crochet where I had the black yarn. I'm going to take that out. And I'm going to go ahead and take out the yarn where I have the bottom stitch of the chain 2. And then I'm going to leave the red yarn in the top stitch of the chain 2, and I'm going to make my slip stitch. I'm going to go right through the space where I have the red yarn. That's the top stitch of the first chain 2. So now I have 2 loops on the hook. I'm going to yarn over and bring the yarn through both loops on the hook for a slip stitch. And that makes your last joining cross stitch. So now I have a total of 27 cross stitches, and that is how my work looks so far. So after the slip stitch, then you're going to make your initial chain 2 for the next round. 1, 2. And I'm going to go ahead and keep putting yarn markers through each of the stitches so you can see that initial chain 2. So as you can see, I have the gray stitch in the bottom stitch of the chain 2, and the red yarn is in the top stitch of that initial chain 2. Then I'm going to make my cross stitch right into my first cross stitch. So I'm going to look at the stitches because you want to work. Here's the cross stitch right here. So you want to work directly above the cross stitch. So I'm going to skip this stitch and work my first half double crochet into this stitch right above this first cross stitch. So I'm going to yarn over, skip the stitch, bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through all 3 for a half double crochet. So far you can see how my work looks. You can see that I'm directly above the cross stitches, and I'm going to make my first cross stitch above the previous row's cross stitch. So I'm going into the skipped stitch now to make my half double crochet, and then you can see here's my first row's cross stitch, second row's cross stitch, third row's cross stitch, and they're all lined up directly above each other. And then over here you can see my initial chain 2. So it might help you if you're having trouble with the joining to put a yarn marker through each of those stitches so you can keep track of them. So now I'm going to make my cross stitches right above the previous row's cross stitch. I'm just going to do a few of them with you, because by now I'm sure you've got the cross stitches down. The joining is the difficult part, but once you get the joining down, then it's going to be a piece of cake. And of course getting the same number of cross stitches for each round, and making sure that your cross stitches are lining up. So here, just going to show you, you can see how my cross stitches are lining up as I work them. Go ahead and finish making your cross stitches all the way around. Make sure you have the same number, and then I'll help you do the next to last cross stitch and the joining cross stitch to finish that round. I'm back to the beginning, and I have one more cross stitch left before the joining cross stitch, and you can see how mine is starting to make a little cup. That's how yours should be looking as well. So I'm going to go ahead and work that last cross stitch before the joining cross stitch. So I'm going to yarn over, skip a stitch, and I'm in the stitch right before my chain, the base of my chain 2 stitch. And then I'm going to work a half double crochet into the skipped stitch. Then you can see the yarn markers that I have for the bottom of the first chain 2, and then the top stitch is the red. That's the one you're going to be slip stitching into. Now, the stitch that you're going to work your half double crochet into, here is the base of that initial chain 2. And let me just pull it straight up. So you can see it kind of gets pulled over, but this is your initial chain 2, and then this is the base of that initial chain 2. So I'm going to put a yarn marker into the stitch that we're going to work our half double crochet into. So we're not going to work into the base of that initial chain 2. You're going to go into the next stitch over. So I'm going to put the black yarn through that stitch so you can see which stitch we're going to be working the half double crochet into. So you're not, the problem that I saw someone making was they were going right in the gap. You're not working in the gap under the chain 2. You're working in the stitch right below the gap. So I'm going to make a half double crochet right where I have the black yarn marker, going right in that stitch. I'm going to bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through all 3 for a half double crochet. So I'm going to take that black yarn marker out now. Now you're covering that initial chain 2. So if you move the stitches over, you'll see how that top stitch of that initial chain 2 comes into view, which is where I have my red yarn. I'm going to go into that stitch where I have the red yarn marker, and I'm going to make a slip stitch. So I'm going to yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through both loops on the hook for a slip stitch. And then you finished that round. So I'm going to go ahead and take out the yarn markers now to show you. And you can see how you finished the cross stitch for that round. And now you want to count your cross stitches and make sure that you have the same number of cross stitches. So here you can see I'm going to count starting, this is my initial, and it goes at an angle. So they're directly, the cross stitches are directly over each other, but they're going at an angle. So the loop where I've made the slip stitch is over the joining cross stitches, but I'm going to count here after that. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27. So you can see how they're lining up, and I have the exact same number of cross stitches for every round. Now we're going to make our initial chain 2 for the next round. So 1, 2. And this is how you're going to make every round until you've completed 20 rounds. So I'm going to do a few more with you. So again, to help you see that initial chain 2, I'm putting the gray yarn marker through the bottom stitch of the first chain 2, and I'm putting the red yarn through the top stitch of that initial chain 2. Then I'm going to make my first cross stitch directly above the previous row's cross stitch. So that is critical, this first cross stitch, because sometimes it looks like you want to work into this stitch, but that is the joining cross stitches, and you don't want to work the cross stitch through that one. So you want to make sure that you're lining up your cross stitches to do it correctly. So you just yarn over, you skip the stitch right above that first stitch on your previous row's cross stitch. You make your half double crochet, and you can see how my work looks. This is the previous row's first cross stitch. Now I'm going to work my half double crochet in the skipped stitch. And I have, for this round, I have my initial chain 2 and my first cross stitch is lining up perfectly. I'm going to do one more with you, and then I'll come back to help you join this round. So go ahead, finish your cross stitches directly over your previous row's cross stitches, and then I'll come back to help you join again. Alright, so now I'm back to the beginning again, and let me just show you. So here is where I have the brown yarn marker. That is the base of your initial chain 2. So here is the initial chain 2, and I'll line it up so you can see the brown at the base of your initial chain 2. Here's the bottom stitch with the gray and the top stitch with the red yarn going through it. Now I'm going to put a black yarn marker into the stitch that you're going to make your half double crochet into. So here again is the base of your initial chain 2. So the next stitch over is where you're going to be working your half double crochet. So I'm going to go ahead and bring a yarn marker through that stitch to show you. So here you can see that this is the stitch that you want to work your last half double crochet for your joining cross stitch, not into the gap, which is where the person was having the problem. It looked like that they were working it into this stitch, which is not what you want to do. And putting yarn markers into your initial chain 2 may help you see the joining initially, which I would recommend if you're still having problems. So here I'm going to work a half double crochet into the stitch that I have the black yarn marker. So I finished my last cross stitch. I'm going to skip the stitch of the base of my initial chain 2 and work into the next stitch over. So I'm going to make a half double crochet into that stitch where I have my black yarn marker. I'm going to bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through all 3 to form the last cross stitch. You could scoop that half double crochet over to reveal the top stitch of the first chain, top stitch of the first chain 2 that we made. That's the stitch that you're going to be doing, making your slip stitch. So I'm going to take my crochet hook, go into that stitch. You can see how I went right through the center of that stitch. I'm going to yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and then go through both loops on the hook for a slip stitch. And then you joined that round, and that round is complete. And that's how you have to do every round when you join. Then you can make your chain 2, 1, 2 for the next round. So I'm going to go ahead and let you make a few more rows, because remember we need 20 rounds total before we get to the next part of the cocoon. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to get started to show you your first cross stitch for this round. So I'm going to put yarn markers into the stitches that we're going to be working. The first cross stitch, because that's critical really, is your first cross stitch as well as the joining cross stitch to make sure that you get that down. And then once you get it down, you'll be able to work these very easily. So here you can see where I put the yarn markers. This is the joining cross stitch, right where I have my first chain 2, 1, 2. Now this is the first cross stitch from the previous rows. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4 rows so far that we've completed. This is the third row, and you could see how this cross stitch on the fourth row lines up. So I put yarn markers into the stitches that we're going to be working our first cross stitch. So I'm going to make a half double crochet. I'm going to skip the first stitch where the red yarn is and work my half double crochet into the stitch with the gray yarn marker. And now I'm going to finish the cross stitch by working a half double crochet through the skipped stitch, which is where the red yarn is. Now I can take the yarn markers out, and I finished the first cross stitch. So here is the first chain 2 for the round, and this is the first cross stitch for the round. Now you're going to finish making your cross stitches all the way around back to the beginning, and then come back. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and let you join this one. So I'm going to let you do the next few rounds, and then I'll come back and see how you're doing, and then do one more with you to make sure that you're remembering how to do it correctly. All right, so this is how your work should be looking, and I already finished joining my last round, and so far I've completed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rounds. I'm on my 9th round, and all of my cross stitches, here's my joining cross stitch, here's my first cross stitch, and you can see how they're all lining up, which is how yours should be looking as well, if you're doing it correctly. I'm just going to work, let me put my yarn marker back in. I'm just going to work this first cross stitch with you on the 9th round and then do the joining just to make sure you're still doing it correctly. And here is my first initial chain 2, and I put a yarn marker through the top stitch of the initial chain 2 so you can see it when we finish our joining cross stitch slip stitch. And I'm also going to put yarn markers into my first cross stitch, the stitches, so you can see which stitches I'm working in for my first one. Oop. See if I can join that yarn marker. There we go. All right. So now you can see how my yarn markers, this is my first cross stitch row. And so the previous row's cross stitch is right here, and I put, this is the skipped stitch, and this is the first stitch that I'm going to make my half double crochet. You can see it's directly over the cross stitch on the previous row. So this is what my work looks like so far. My first chain 2, and I'm going to work my half double crochet into the stitch, skip a stitch on my first, the previous row's cross stitch, And my work looks like this. This is my initial chain 2. Now I'm going to work a half double crochet in the skipped stitch. And for this round, this is my first initial chain 2 and my first cross stitch. So go ahead and finish working your cross stitches. I'm going to take this out. Oh, I'm actually going to leave in the red one because when we join, that way you can see the stitch that I'm joining at the end. I'm going to work one more cross stitch with you and then I'll come back when we're ready to join. So go ahead, finish all your cross stitches and then come back and I'll do the last joining cross stitch with you. Okay, I just finished my last cross stitch and I just want to show you to familiarize you with my yarn marker placements. So here the red yarn is in the top stitch of my initial chain 2 for the round. And then here, where the gray yarn is the stitch, the next stitch over from where I finished my cross stitch. This is the base of my initial chain 2. So the gray stitch is the base of my initial chain 2. And then the next stitch over, where the black yarn is beneath the gap made by the initial chain 2. So that is the stitch that you're going to be working your half double crochet into. So here again is the first chain 2, and I am going to be working in the stitch where the black yarn is. So I'm going to yarn over. I'm going to go into that stitch where the black yarn is. I'm going to bring up a loop. I'm going behind that chain 2. See how I'm going behind the chain 2, the initial chain 2? And I'm going to bring up a loop. Grabbing my red yarn, there we go. I have 3 loops on the hook. I'm going to yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through all 3 for a half double crochet. Now I'm going to go ahead and remove the black and the gray yarn. And you can see that I have the red yarn still in the top stitch of that first chain 2 that we made. So I'm going to take my crochet hook. I'm going to go through that stitch right where I have my red yarn marker. I'm going to yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through both loops on the hook for a slip stitch. Now I can take out the red yarn marker, and you could see how I finished my last cross stitch. And you could see how all of my cross stitches are lining up right above the other previous rows, and this is how your work should be looking. Now I'm going to go ahead and get you started for the next round. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I'm on my 10th round. I'm going to chain 2, 1, 2. I'm going to yarn over. I'm going to skip the stitch right above my previous rows, cross stitch, and work into that second stitch for my half double crochet. And then I'm going to make a half double crochet into the skipped stitch. And then I'm just going to keep making cross stitches above my previous rows cross stitches all the way back to the beginning, and then come back and I'll help you join this round and then let you finish the rest. Now I just finished my last cross stitch, and I'm going to show you without the yarn markers how I'm going to do my joining cross stitch. So here is my initial chain 2. So I'm going to yarn over, and I'm going to work into the next stitch after the base of the initial chain 2. I'm not going into the gap. You can see how I'm not working in the gap made by that chain 2. I'm working in the stitch below that gap. So you can see how I'm in the stitch. I'm going behind the chain 2. I'm bringing up a loop, 3 loops on my hook, yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through all 3 for a half double crochet. And I formed a cross stitch with that initial chain 2. Now I'm going to go into the top stitch of that first chain 2, yarn over, and bring the yarn through both loops on the hook for a slip stitch. Then I'm going to chain 2 for the next round. And I'm going to go ahead and get you started on the 11th round, and then you're going to go ahead and finish the rounds all the way up. We need 20 rounds total for the bottom portion of the cocoon. When you get to the 20th round, come back and I'll work that one with you. So I'm going to work my cross stitch above the previous rows. First cross stitch. Here is my previous row's first cross stitch. You can see I skipped a stitch. So go ahead and finish making your rounds all the way up to the 20th round and then come back. This is how your work should be looking. You can see how I have a nice tube forming for the bottom of the cocoon. And I just want to show you how many rows that I have. So far I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So I'm on my 20th row, and I'm going to show you again the joining. So I finished my last cross stitch, and here's the stitch where I did my last cross stitch. This is the next stitch over, which is the chain, the base of the chain 2, and I have the red yarn in the top stitch of that initial chain 2. The next stitch over is where I have my black yarn, and that is where I am going to work my half double crochet. And that black yarn is through the stitch that is beneath the gap that is formed by my initial chain 2. So you can see that I'm going to work my half double crochet into the stitch right below the gap. And that is going to be my joining cross stitch. So I'm going to yarn over. I'm going to go into the stitch where I have my black yarn marker. I'm going to go behind my chain 2, my initial chain 2, bring up a loop, 3 loops on my hook, yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through all 3 for half double crochet. Then I can take out that black yarn marker. Now I'm going to make a slip stitch into the top stitch of my first chain 2. So I'm going to go right through where I have my red yarn marker. That's the top stitch of my initial chain 2. I'm going to yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through both loops on the hook for a slip stitch. And that joined the last round for the bottom of the cocoon. Now we're going to do a double crochet increase round. Now for the next round, the first thing you're going to do is make a chain of 3. 1, 2, 3. That's going to count as your first double crochet for the round. So that is a chain 3. In the next stitch over, here, these stitches are right above the joining cross stitch. We're not going to work in those stitches. We're going to work in the stitches over the first cross stitch from the previous row. I'm going to make 2 double crochet into that first stitch. So I have 3 loops on my hook, yarn over and go through 2. Then I have 2 loops left on the hook, yarn over and go through 2 for a double crochet. So now I have my initial chain 3, and then in the next stitch over I have 1 double crochet. I'm going to make 1 more double crochet in the same stitch. So yarn over, go in the same stitch, bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through 2, yarn over and go through 2. Now in the next stitch you're going to make 1 double crochet. So you're going to yarn over, go into the next stitch, bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through 2, and then yarn over and go through 2. And then you're going to make 2 double crochet into the next stitch. So you're going to keep repeating this pattern all the way around back to your beginning chain 3. And this is your increase round using double crochet. So I'm going to do one more set with you. This is how my work is looking so far. I'm going to make 1 double crochet in the next stitch. And then I'm going to make 2 double crochet into the second stitch. And then you're just going to repeat that all the way around back to your initial chain 3, and then come back and I'll show you what to do next. I'm back to my initial chain 3. I have 1 stitch left. I just finished 2 double crochet in the previous stitch. I'm going to make 1 double crochet in my last stitch, and then I'm going to slip stitch into the top stitch of my first chain 3. So here's the bottom 1, here's the middle 2, and here's the top 3rd stitch. So I'm going to take my crochet hook, go right through the center of that top stitch. You can see how I went right through it. Then I'm going to yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through both loops on the hook for a slip stitch to finish that round. So I finished 76 stitches on that round, that increase round. Then we're going to do, the next round is going to be a cross stitch round. So you're going to chain 2, 1, 2. So that's going to be your initial chain 2 for this round. Then you're going to skip the next stitch and work a half double crochet into the second stitch. So just yarn over, go into that second stitch, bring up a loop, and just like you did before, you're going to make a half double crochet cross stitch, make a half double crochet into the skipped stitch, and that's my first half double crochet cross stitch, and here is my first chain 2 for the round. And as you know from doing all these previous cross stitches how important this initial chain 2 is when you get back to that for your joining cross stitch. So I'm going to skip the next stitch, work a half double crochet into the second stitch. Then I'm going to work a half double crochet into the skipped stitch. And you're just going to repeat that all the way around. So you can see how I finished 2 cross stitches. I'm going to do one more with you. I'm going to skip a stitch, work a half double crochet into the next stitch. Work a half double crochet into the skipped stitch. And here's my initial chain 2. And I have 1, 2, 3 cross stitches. Go ahead, finish making your cross stitches all the way around, and I will work that last joining cross stitch with you before we move up and change colors. All right, so I just finished my 37th cross stitch for this round, and I have yarn markers in to show you the stitches that we're going to be working our joining cross stitch. So I'm going to point out all of the yarn markers so you can see what's left. The black yarn is through the last remaining stitch. So you have 1 stitch remaining. 1 stitch remaining, and I just put the tapestry needle right through that 1 stitch remaining. And that is right before the stitch here, which is the base of your chain 2. So the brown yarn, or the golden brown yarn, is in the base stitch of your initial chain 2. And then I have the red yarn in the top stitch of that initial chain 2. Then the gray yarn is in the stitch after the base stitch of your initial chain 2, and that is the stitch where the gray yarn is that you're going to work your half double crochet. And as you can see, that gray yarn is right beneath the gap created by your initial chain 2. You're not going to work in that gap. You're going to work in the stitch below the gap where the gray yarn is. Now I'm going to leave all the yarn markers as I work, now that you know where all of the yarn markers lie. So I'm going to skip the stitch where I have the black yarn, and I'm going to work a half double crochet into the stitch that I have the brown yarn, because we're going to make one more cross stitch before we make the last joining cross stitch. So I'm going to yarn over. I'm going to make a half double crochet in the stitch where I have the golden brown yarn, which is the base of the initial chain 2. And this is the same thing that we did for our initial round at the bottom. That first initial round where we only had the 1 stitch left before the joining cross stitch. Now I'm going to make a half double crochet into the black yarn stitch, which is the stitch that I skipped. So I'm going to yarn over, go into that black, the stitch where the black yarn is, bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through all 3 for my next to last cross stitch. So I can take out the golden brown and the black yarn, because now we're going to do our joining cross stitch. So you could see here is my initial chain 2, and I have the red yarn in the top stitch of that initial chain 2 where I'm going to make my slip stitch. But first I need to make a half double crochet into the stitch that I have the gray yarn, which is in the stitch right below the gap created by the chain 2, the initial chain 2. So here's the gap created by the initial chain 2, and I'm going to work a half double crochet into the stitch right below that gap where I have the gray yarn, and that's going to be my last joining cross stitch. So I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to go into the space where I have the gray yarn, I'm going to go behind my chain 2, my initial chain 2, I'm going to bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through all 3 for a half double crochet. So now I can take out that gray yarn, and you can see the stitch that I need to create my slip stitch because I have the red yarn going through that stitch to help show where it is. I'm just going to take my crochet hook, go through that stitch, that top stitch of the initial, oops, the initial chain 2, and then I'm going to yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through both loops on the hook for a slip stitch. Then I can take out that yarn marker, and I finished the last joining cross stitch for that round. Now we're going to go ahead and finish off because we're going to get our new color. So you're going to yarn over and pull enough yarn through to tie a knot and bury into our work. And you just finished that last cross stitch round. Now you're going to get your new color, and in my case I'm using the beautiful purple color. Now you're going to take your crochet hook and you're going to go into the stitch where you finished off, where you have the loose yarn end, and it's right before the cross stitch on the previous row. So you have your 2 stitches from the cross stitch from the previous row, and I'm going to go ahead and put a yarn marker in there so you can see. We're going to work it the same way that we did before, but with the new color. I'm just going to put these yarn markers in so you can see the cross stitch easier. So here is the previous row's cross stitch. The red yarn is in the skipped stitch that we're going to skip, and then the brown yarn is in the first stitch that we're going to create our half double crochet. So in the stitch right before the stitch we're going to skip that has the red yarn marker in it, you're going to join your new color. And leave enough yarn to tie your knot. Then you're going to yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through your loop for chain. Then you're going to take and tie a knot. I like to carry my loose yarn ends and bury them as I work. So I'm going to take and hold those to the side because I'm going to work behind the loose yarn ends. The first thing you're going to do for this round is make your initial chain 2. 1, 2. So by now, you know how important this first initial chain 2 is. I'm going to put a yarn marker through the top stitch of this first initial chain 2, just so you can see when I do my joining cross stitch where to make your slip stitch for the round. So you can see I have the black yarn going through the top stitch of my initial chain 2. Now you're going to yarn over, you're going to skip a stitch where I have the red yarn marker and work a half double crochet into the stitch where I have the golden brown yarn marker, and that will make your cross stitch right above the previous row's cross stitch, except you're going to have a different color. Then you're going to yarn over, go into the skipped stitch where I have the red yarn marker, bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through all 3 to complete your cross stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and take out the red and the brown yarn marker and then just show you. So you have your first cross stitch with the new color directly above your previous row's cross stitch, and you also have your initial chain 2 for the round, and at the top stitch of that initial chain 2 I have the black yarn marker to help show you where to join. Now, just like you did on your previous rounds on the cocoon, you're going to line up your cross stitches over the previous row's cross stitches. So I'm going to do a couple with you. I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to skip the next stitch, work a half double crochet into the second stitch, and then I'm going to make a half double crochet into the skipped stitch, and you're just going to keep making the cross stitches directly above the previous row's cross stitches with your new color. I'll do one more with you, and then come back when you reach your beginning chain 2, and I'll show you how to do your last joining cross stitch. I just wanted to show you that all of my cross stitches have lined up nicely with the previous row's cross stitches, which is what you want. Now I'm back to my beginning chain 2, and I just want to show you this one's going to be a little bit different because you have 2 stitches now from the previous row's cross stitch, making it a little bit easier. So I'm going to go ahead and finish my last cross stitch before I make the joining. So I finished my last cross stitch before my joining cross stitch, and I just want to show you the yarn markers that I have to help you in making this last joining cross stitch, which you may already know how to do by now, but I just want to make sure. Here where I have the red yarn, that is in the base of the initial chain 2 stitch. Actually, it's right there, so I'm going to move it. Okay, so now you can see that here is your initial chain 2, and here where the red yarn is at the base of your initial chain 2. The next stitch over is where I have the gray yarn marker. That is the stitch that you're going to make your half double crochet into, and not into the gap created by your initial chain 2. So you can see that right below this gap made by your initial chain 2, there is a stitch that I have my gray yarn marker going through where I'm going to make my half double crochet. So I'm going to take and yarn over. I'm going to go into the stitch where I have the gray yarn marker. I'm going to go behind my initial chain 2. I'm going to bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through all 3 for a half double crochet. Then I can take out this red and gray yarn marker. The only yarn marker I have left is in the top stitch of my initial chain 2. So I'm going to take my crochet hook and go right through that same stitch where I have the black yarn marker. I'm going to yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through both loops on the hook for a slip stitch. And that finishes joining that round. Now I'm going to change color again. So I'm going to go ahead and finish off. Just yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through the loop and bring enough yarn through to tie a knot and bury into your work. Then you can see the beautiful purple stripe that you made at the top of your cocoon. And it looks like this so far. Looks beautiful. And here's the bottom. Now you're going to take your new color, which is the same color that we used for the bottom of the cocoon, and you're going to join the same way. So I'm going to go ahead and use yarn markers again just to help you. So here is my previous row's cross stitch. So I'm going to place a yarn marker into the stitches above so you can see which stitch I'm skipping and which one I'm making my first cross stitch for the row. So you can see the red yarn is going to be the stitch that I skip, and the brown yarn is where I'm going to make my first half double crochet for the cross stitch above the previous row's cross stitch. I'm going to join my new color in the stitch where I finished off, and it's right before the stitch that I have the red yarn marker. I'm going to take my new color. Make sure you leave enough yarn for tying a knot and burying your loose yarn end. You're going to chain 1, yarn over, go through that loop for chain 1. Then you're just going to tie a knot. And again, I like to carry my loose yarn ends as I work, so I don't have to bury them later. You're going to make your initial chain 2 for this new round. Yarn over, go through the loop for 1, yarn over, go through the loop for 2. So here is my initial chain 2 for the round. I'm going to yarn over, skip the stitch where I have my red yarn marker, and work a half double crochet into the stitch where I have the brown yarn marker. I'm going to go behind my loose yarn ends, yarn over, bring up a loop. I have 3 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through all 3 for a half double crochet. Then I'm going to make a half double crochet into the skipped stitch, which is the stitch where I have the red yarn marker, go behind the loose yarn ends, bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through all 3 for a completed half double crochet cross stitch. I'm going to go ahead and take out those yarn markers, and you can see that I have my initial chain 2 and my first cross stitch directly over the cross stitch on the previous row. So now I'm going to put a yarn marker into the top stitch of my first chain 2. That way you'll be able to see. I'm going to join with you again because that's the trickiest part for the beginners. So I will keep joining with you to make sure that you got it. So you can see how I have my red yarn marker going through the top stitch of the first chain 2 that I created. And so far I finished 1 cross stitch. Now I'm going to yarn over. I'm going to skip the next stitch and work a half double crochet into the next stitch, going behind my loose yarn ends. Now I'm going to yarn over and go into the skipped stitch, bring up a loop, make my half double crochet, and you can see how I have 2 cross stitches directly above the previous row's cross stitch, and here is my initial chain 2. So go ahead, finish making your cross stitches all the way around, and then come back and I'll join with you. As you can see, every cross stitch is right above the previous row's cross stitch. That's how it should look all around the front. And then now I'm back. I finished my last cross stitch, and I'm going to finish my joining cross stitch now, and I just want to show you, here is my initial chain 2, and I have the red yarn going through the top stitch of that initial chain 2. And then the brown yarn is going through, here is the gap created by the initial chain 2. You're not going to work in that gap. You're going to work in the stitch right below the gap where I have the brown yarn marker. Let me see if I can bring that in. See how I have the brown yarn marker right in that stitch? Now I'm going to yarn over and go into that stitch where I have my brown yarn marker. I'm going to go behind my chain 2, the initial chain 2, bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through all 3 for a half double crochet. And I can go ahead and take away that brown yarn marker. Then I'm going to make a slip stitch into the top stitch of the initial chain 2, which is where I have the red yarn marker. So I'm going to take my crochet hook, go right through that stitch where I have the red yarn marker. I want to grab the red yarn. Then I'm going to yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through both loops on the hook for a slip stitch. I'm going to go ahead and take out the yarn marker now. And that joins that round. And that round is complete now. Then you're going to chain 2 to get ready for the next round. So I made my first chain 2 for the next round. You're going to make 4 more rounds with this color before we change to the new color. So I'm going to do the first cross stitch with you. I'm going to yarn over, skip a stitch, go into the next stitch, make my half double crochet, then I'm going to yarn over, go into the skipped stitch, and make my half double crochet. And you could see how I have my first initial chain 2, and my first cross stitch directly above my previous row's cross stitch. Go ahead and finish. You're going to finish 4 more rounds and then come back on the 4th round and I'll join with you the last cross stitch and change colors. This is how your work should be looking. You could see how beautiful the design looks and how all of my cross stitches are lining up right above the previous row's cross stitches. And I finished 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows with the same color that I used for the bottom. I'm going to do the last joining cross stitch with you again, and I'm going to go ahead and put the yarn markers too, that way you can see what stitches I'm working in. I'm putting the red yarn marker into the top stitch of the initial chain 2. And I'm putting the brown yarn marker into the stitch right after the base stitch of the initial chain 2. And this stitch is also right beneath the gap created by your initial chain 2. I just finished my last cross stitch. Now I'm going to yarn over and go into the stitch where I have the brown yarn marker. I'm going to go behind my initial chain 2. I went right through the yarn marker too. So I'm going to go behind the initial chain 2, bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, turn the hook upside down and go through all 3 for a half double crochet. Take away my yarn marker. Now I have the red yarn marker left in the stitch from my top stitch of my initial chain 2. I'm going to go right through that stitch. I'm going to yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through both loops for a slip stitch. And I joined my last joining cross stitch. For this next round, we're going to join a new color. So I'm going to yarn over, go through the loop, bring enough yarn through to bury into my work. Now you're going to bring in your new color. And again, I'm just going to show you with yarn markers, that way there's no question about which stitches that you're going to be working into. So here you could see my red yarn marker is in the skipped stitch, the one that we're going to skip. The brown yarn marker is in the stitch that we're going to work our first half double crochet. And that is directly above the previous row's cross stitch. Now I'm going to go into the stitch right before the stitch with my red yarn marker. I'm going to join the new color. I'm going to make a chain, yarn over, go through the loop for a chain. Then you're going to tie a knot. Then I'm going to make a chain of 2. 1, 2. So that's going to be our initial chain 2 for the round. I'm going to bury my loose yarn ends as I work. So I'm going to make my first half double crochet into the stitch where I have my brown yarn marker, go behind my loose yarn ends, bring up a loop, make my half double crochet. Now I can make my half double crochet into the skipped stitch where I have the red yarn marker, go behind my loose yarn ends, bring up a loop, make my half double crochet. Now I can remove my yarn markers and show you. This is my first chain 2, initial chain 2, and my first cross stitch with the new color directly over the previous row's cross stitch. I'm going to make one more cross stitch with the new color with you. So I'm going to yarn over, skip a stitch, go into the next stitch, behind my loose yarn ends, bring up a loop, make a half double crochet, yarn over, go into the skipped stitch, bring up a loop, make my half double crochet, and you can see how I have my cross stitches. This is my initial chain 2 and then my 2 cross stitches right above the previous row's cross stitches. Go ahead, finish making your cross stitches all the way around back to your initial chain 2 and then come back and I'll join with you. Now I'm back to my initial chain 2 and I'm going to make my last joining cross stitch, and I'm going to make it without the yarn markers this time because you should have gotten it by now. I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to go into the stitch after the base stitch for the initial chain 2, go behind the chain 2, the initial chain 2, bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through all 3, and then I'm going to move it over slightly because that's going to reveal my initial chain 2 stitch, and I'm going to go into that stitch for a slip stitch. And that joins that round. This is what the round looks like so far. Now we're going to work the next round, which is just going to be 1 double crochet into every stitch around. The first thing you're going to do is make a chain of 3. 1, 2, 3. This first chain 3 is going to count as your first double crochet. Now you're going to make 1 double crochet into every stitch around, just 1. You're not going to make an increase round. You're going to keep the same number of stitches. Yarn over, go into the next stitch, bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over, go through 2, yarn over and go through 2 for a double crochet. So you're going to go ahead and complete 1 double crochet into every stitch around, and then come back and I'll show you how to join and move up to the next round. Now I'm back to my initial chain 3, and I finished making 1 double crochet into every stitch around. I'm going to make a slip stitch into the top stitch of the first chain 3, yarn over and pull the yarn through both loops on your hook for a slip stitch. Now you're ready for your next round. The next round, you're using the same color. You're going to chain 2, 1, 2, and then you're going to make your cross stitches all the way around. So you're going to yarn over, you're going to skip the next stitch, and you're going to work your half double crochet into the next stitch. Then you're going to yarn over, go into the skipped stitch, just like you've been doing in the previous cross stitch rounds. So here is our initial chain 2, and then our first cross stitch. So I'm going to skip the next stitch, half double crochet into the second stitch, and then I'm going to make a half double crochet into the skipped stitch, and I'm going to repeat that all the way around back to the initial chain 2, and then come back and I'll help you do the joining cross stitch. I just finished my last cross stitch, and I'm going to complete my joining cross stitch now. So I'm going to yarn over, I'm going to go into the stitch right after the base stitch of our initial chain 2. I'm going to go behind the chain 2, bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through all 3 for a half double crochet. And even though it doesn't have the yarn marker in it, you can tell by now that this is the top stitch of my initial chain 2 that I'm going to make my slip stitch into. I'm going right through the stitch. Then I'm going to yarn over and bring the yarn through both loops on the hook for a slip stitch for that round. Then you're going to go ahead and finish off, just yarn over and pull enough yarn through to bury into your work. And you can see how my work looks on the back. This is how it looks on the front. You can see all of the stitches are nice and neat in rows. So we just finished that last joining stitch. Now we're going to bring our new color in. We're almost done with the cocoon. We're going to join just like we've done in the past. Join our new color, chain 1, tie a knot, you're going to make your initial chain 2 for the round, 1, 2, then you're going to skip the next stitch, yarn over, work your half double crochet into the second stitch, go behind your loose yarn ends, bring up a loop, 3 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through all 3 for a half double crochet. Then you're going to make a half double crochet into the skipped stitch, and then you can see how you have your initial chain 2 and your first cross stitch right above the previous row's cross stitch. Then you're going to make 2 more rounds of cross stitches with this new color. Go ahead and make 2 more rounds of cross stitches with this color, and then on your second round come back and I'll help you join, and then we'll make our last round for the cocoon. I just finished my last cross stitch for the second round, and you can see how all of my cross stitches are lining up like they're supposed to. Then I'm going to make my last joining cross stitch. So here is my initial chain 2. Make sure you can see where your initial chain 2 is for this round. Then I'm going to make my slip, my half double crochet right across my initial chain 2 right into the stitch below the gap. So I'm going to yarn over go into that stitch, behind the initial chain 2, bring up a loop, 3 loops on my hook, yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through all 3 for a half double crochet. Then I'm going to make a slip stitch into the top stitch of my initial chain 2, yarn over and bring the yarn through both loops on the hook. Then you're going to go ahead and finish off, yarn over and pull enough yarn through to bury into your work, and we're going to get ready for our last round. So one more round and we will be done with our beautiful cocoon. Alright, so now we're going to join our new color. You're going to take your crochet hook, go into that stitch right where we finished off, bring your new color, hook it and bring it through, leave enough loose yarn in for burying into your work. And you're going to yarn over, turn the hook upside down and go through that loop for a chain 1. Then you're going to take and tie a knot with the loose yarn ends. Then you're going to take and turn the work over. So now I have the wrong side facing me. The wrong side of the cocoon is facing me. And we're going to bury our loose yarn ends as we work. And the reason why we're turning it this way is so that our little purple rosebuds that we're going to create will face outwards on the cocoon. So the first thing we're going to do is make a chain of 5. Oops, sorry about that. No, we're not going to make a chain of 5. We're going to make a single crochet into the next stitch over. So you're going to go into the next stitch over, behind your loose yarn ends, bring up a loop, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through both for a single crochet. Then you're going to make a single crochet into the next stitch. So you're going to go into the next stitch, behind your loose yarn ends, bring up a loop, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through both for your second single crochet. So 1 single crochet into 2 stitches so far. Now we're going to make a single crochet into the 3rd stitch. Then now you're going to make a chain of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then you're going to take your crochet hook and go into the first chain that you made. So I'm going to show you with my tapestry needle. You're going to go into this first chain. So right here, right down the center, right where I have my tapestry needle, you're going to go into that first chain with your crochet hook. Take your crochet hook, go into that first chain. You're going to make a slip stitch. So you're going to yarn over and you're going to turn the hook upside down and go through both loops on your hook for a slip stitch. And you just finished 1 little purple bud. Then you're going to go into the next stitch over, go behind the loose yarn ends, bring up a loop, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through both for a single crochet. And you're just going to keep repeating this all the way around your cocoon to make your little purple flowers. So I'm going to make another one with you. We did 1 single crochet. I'm going to go into the next stitch, go behind loose yarn ends, bring up a loop, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through both for a single crochet. And go into the next stitch, go behind the loose yarn ends, bring up a loop, 2 loops on the hook, yarn over and go through both for a single crochet. Now I'm going to make a chain of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I'm going to take my crochet hook, go into that first chain, and you're going to make a slip stitch. So you're going to yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and go through both loops on your hook for a slip stitch. Then you're going to go into the next stitch behind the loose yarn ends, bring up a loop, yarn over and go through both loops for a single crochet. Go into the next stitch, make a single crochet, go into the next stitch, make a single crochet, and then I'm going to chain 5. And then I'm going to go into that first chain I made, going to make a slip stitch, yarn over and bring the yarn through both loops on your hook for a slip stitch. I'm going to go ahead and cut my loose yarn ends now. And then I'm going to do one more set with you, but I'm going to show you what it looks like so far. Let me finish my single crochet in the next one. So this is what it looks like so far. You can see how you have like little purple buds, flower buds, all along the top of your cocoon. So I'm going to do a few more with you, make sure you got the hang of it, and then I'll let you finish making them all across the top of your cocoon. So I did one single crochet, make one single crochet in the second, one single crochet in the third, and then I'm going to chain 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then I'm going to make a slip stitch into the first chain. And I'll do one more with you. I'm going to go into the next stitch, make a single crochet, second stitch, single crochet, third stitch, single crochet, then I'm going to chain 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you can see my chain of 5. Then I'm going to go into the first chain that I created, right down the center, that first chain. I'm going to make a slip stitch, so I'm going to yarn over, turn the hook upside down, and then just bring the yarn through both loops on your hook for a slip stitch. Then I'm going to make a single crochet into the next stitch and start all over again. So go ahead, finish making your purple buds or flower buds across the top, and then come back. So I just finished a bud, and then I did a single crochet into 2 stitches, and I have my initial joining stitch. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into that last stitch, make a single crochet, and then I'm going to make one last bud, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, make a slip stitch into that initial chain 1, and then I'm going to go ahead and slip stitch into my first single crochet. Just yarn over and bring the yarn through both loops on the hook for a slip stitch. Then I'm going to finish off. Just yarn over and pull enough yarn through to bury into your work. Then you are almost done with your beautiful cocoon. Let me just show you mine. So here are my rosebuds at the top. Here's the back. You can still see where you did your cross stitches, the faint seam along the back, and then here's the front of your beautiful cocoon. The fact, if you buried your loose yarn ends with me, then you don't have many loose yarn ends to bury. But go ahead and turn your work inside out because you do have the loose yarn end from this magic circle that you started with. So you're going to take your tapestry needle, put that loose yarn end right onto the tapestry needle, and then you're just going to bury the loose yarn end by weaving your tapestry needle in and out, and make sure you don't sew your cocoon together. You don't want to do that. You just want to bury the loose yarn end into the bottom. And then cut the loose yarn end after you've buried it as much as you want. And then the only other loose yarn end that I have is where I finished off with the rosebud. So I'm going to go ahead and bury that. And how I bury that one is I just take and weave in and out through the purple portion. And you can go in and out, weaving the loose yarn end into your work. When it's nice and buried, then you can take and cut it. Now I'm going to show you how to place the ribbon. Take whatever ribbon that you want for your bow and cut the length. Just kind of measure around and cut the length of bow that you want. Then you're going to make sure that your cocoon, that the seam, the joining seam is on the back. Have the front facing you. Then take your ribbon and find the double crochet row that you made, the center of the purple portion. Then you're going to find the exact center where you want your bow, and then just take the ribbon and you're going to weave it in and out between the double crochets. So on the front portion you can leave as much showing as you want. For me, I skipped 3 double crochets and then came up from 1 double crochet. And you're going to do that all the way around, back to the beginning, and then come back. Then you just tie your bow across the top, and you have your beautiful baby cocoon all finished.